Good morning and welcome to the forum. My name is Malcolm Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. And we're so pleased for this forum today. I've been looking forward to it so much. Over the last few years, we've made some great strides toward equal rights and acceptance for LGBT people, notably the freedom to marry in all 50 states. But we have a long way to go. Just a few weeks ago, Susan Stryker and I talked about current challenges for transgender people, much in the news lately. And there's a great deal of concern for rights of all people may be rolled back under the current administration. We're especially concerned about those who are most vulnerable. So the struggle against homophobia is as urgent as ever. One way to nurture human rights for LGBT people and their families and friends is for them to tell their stories. And today's guest, Kristen Enos, has been doing that for 25 years, sharing her personal experiences as an Asian American lesbian activist in Orange County, California, which is, for Californians,
if you know.
Yeah, I would say a famously conservative area. She started a column in the Orange County and Long Beach Blade News magazine, and recently in a comic book graphic novel, Active Voice. So her book is in the back of the thing, and it's a 2017 Lambda Literary Awards finalist. So one of the stories she tells is about a fellow UC Irvine student, my wife Heidi Ho, assistant professor of law at USF, who also joins us for a conversation about her stories and how to illustrate the challenges we face today. So thank you both for being here. We're very glad to have you.
No, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah. I enjoyed reading as soon as it arrived in the mail, I just read the whole thing immediately. This year, the Cathedral has a theme. The theme is the gift. And I wonder if the two of you might talk a little bit about what kind of gift LGBTQ people are to society. Like what are the gifts that gay and lesbian people bring to the greater whole?
Well, I think for me and my experiences has been realizing that, challenging people's concepts and definitions of what family and love is about. Because, if you go through life and nobody really makes you kind of think out of the box, then you're not really challenging yourself to say, what does this really mean? What's the richness of it? So when somebody tells you something about themselves that you weren't expecting or could be conflicting to your previously held beliefs, and you go through that and you realize you still love that person or you still accept that person, that's a richness for everybody involved.
Right. How about you, Heidi? Do you have a thought about that?
I think for me, it's more personal, and it has probably to do, I think, with Mother's Day and my mom being on my mind, as well as very much a part of this book. I think for me, it's the gift that she was able to give me. I was raised by two women, and I didn't realize what a gift that was until later in my life.
Yeah. It's funny too. I mean, it's definitely the persistence of love in the face of just such strong opposition too. So there is something very inspiring. I mean, when you have all the doors open for you everywhere you go, you appreciate for the people for whom those doors have been closed and yet who've persisted. But yeah, it's been a powerful moment for us. Kristen, I wonder what signs did you see when you were growing up, just of this part of yourself? Like, how did you become aware of, just what it was that made you different? What was that you shared in common with others?
Well, so a little bit of my background is that, as I said, Asian American. I came to the U.S. when I was 2, so I basically raised in America in 1970. So I was the generation after the women's movement. And I was, oldest child. I was also a Leo, so, diva, born and made. So the idea of, identity and self-worth was actually never an issue for me personally. So as I went through things in life and I started to realize things about myself, so, spoiler is I had a huge crush on my preschool teacher who was a woman. And at that age, the innocence of that and the pureness of that, it's just it wasn't anything to be, embarrassed about. And I don't know if anybody else noticed it, but I did, because obviously that memory stayed with me for a long time. However, because as I talked about, preconceived notions and your expectations of how you should behave, because I came from a military background, military family, I didn't deal with that side of myself overtly. I mean, I was a tomboy, I was into sports, I was not feminine. This is the most feminine I've been in probably 20 years.
I was gonna say.
So that whole thing of, I went through the phase of, having a boyfriend in college and all that, and when I finally clicked with me, I met somebody, and I realized as my interactions with her deepened that I was in love with her, and it wasn't the typical kind of love, because you kind of know the difference. That's when it all just kind of like the light bulb, just went on. And for me, like I said, it wasn't a case of me ever questioning my personal self-worth. It's like, oh, this all makes sense now. It's like, this is what I've been like avoiding for a long time. And so, unfortunately, that situation, didn't work out, but I didn't have friends who were gay. I didn't have anybody that I knew. I didn't have any outlet. So the book really starts right after that moment of like, how do I find community? How do I find friends that are like that? How do I find people I can talk to about that? And that was the start of my activism at UCI, and the start of those columns.
So how did you two meet, and do you have, like, what do you remember of yourselves from your 20-year-old selves?
I was 19.
So like I said, this is a combination of some of the columns I wrote for the magazine, as well as stories that I just never wrote as a column. And the story that involved Heidi, I never actually wrote as an actual column, because it was very much Heidi's story of her realization that her mother was probably, not a stereotypical mom. And I never felt that it was my story. So since I'm a firm believer in consent, I never had a chance to write about it. And I think it was just circumstances that I just thought, I'm going to try. So I Googled her. I was like, Heidi Ho, UCI. I figured, that
Don't
combination.
Google it. It's like Asian. It's like Asian porn or something.
I didn't get that, but I saw an entry and I looked at the picture and USF, and I thought, well, I think that's her. So I did a cold email and said, hey, were you the Heidi Ho at UCI who ran the chat group Above and Beyond? And she's like, yeah, that was me. And if you, to understand Above and Beyond, so that was a program at the Women's Resource Center.
So at the time, I was I worked at the Women's Resource Center. I was deciding to change and double major in women's studies and I was doing criminology and stuff. And so I was lucky I had the key. I had the key to the Women's Resource Center. A lot of money was coming in the 80s to the Women's Resource Center, so we had space. The Gay Lesbian Student Union had like a trailer in the back of the parking lot somewhere. They had no space. And so there's a program called Above and Beyond, which anyone on the Kinsey scale could come and hang out, and we'd have a discussion group, like a chat group once a week, and I would come up with a topic like first loves, or your first pet, or your best friend, and which we all have, and make us all the same, or have a commonality, and we can have a conversation. It was a really enlightening time for me as a 19-year-old from Hawaii, and from Maui, sitting in a room where I was saying out to someone earlier, I was like, I met my first bisexual there. It was like so cool, because I was like, so how does that work? Do we get jealous? I mean, how does that happen? And it was a really great time for me to explore and have conversation. I was a token heterosexual / the most boring of the conversation people, but I had the
moderator.
But I had the key.
So
we had a great group, and that's how we kind of met.
So what are some of the stories that are really vivid memories of that? I mean, it's just amazing that for these 20 years, you both were carrying this story with you. I'd heard it so many times, and you obviously remember it. What are some of the other stories that you heard, in that setting, and what stuck out, and why was this story particularly notable?
Well, so as Heidi said, she was probably the only identified straight person in the entire group. So it was really, an excuse for the Gay Lesbian Student Union to have another meeting space. So we all showed up and, shared our different, experiences. And we would talk about, either the assigned topics or, how Heidi's story actually came to be was, we were talking about Christmas vacations and going back home and visiting.
Yeah, and so at that moment, everybody had gone around the room, and it was like, and it was my turn. I'm like, my brother will be home from Loyola Marymount, and my mom and Auntie Ruby, and so everybody's like, oh, does your mom live with her sister? And I was like, no, in Hawaii you say auntie or uncle as a term of endearment, respect, and and they're like, oh, so she lives with a woman who she's not related to. I'm like, yeah, but she's like my auntie. I've known her pretty much my whole life. Oh, how long has they been living together? I'm like, since I was 9. And they're like, oh, that's cool. And then I think,
the rest of us were looking at each other, like, okay, are you?
Well, they're like, oh, this is, and they're looking at me like I'm weird, and I'm like, what's wrong? And then,
and so we started our little, list of questions is like, well, okay, so they've been together. It's like, do they share the same bedroom?
And I was like, well, yeah, because like by then my 2 older brothers had moved out. We moved to a 3-bedroom house. My brother Kyoki has a room. I have a room in my mom's room. And so it was my mom's friend. So of course she's going to stay in my mom's room, in my mind. Okay.
And then we'd ask like questions like, well, okay.
They stay in the same bed?
Yeah, they stay in the same
I'm
bed.
like, but my mom, I have a twin bed. She has a queen bed. Yes, they stay in the same bed. And so she's just like, they're all like on me now at this point.
Yeah. It's like we all clicked. We were making assumptions. We were college students. I mean, admit a little bit on the rude side, but that we were getting there. It was one of those, you assume until told not. So so we kind of like grilled Heidi a little bit more, and Heidi's like, oh, no, they can't be lesbian. And so I think it was one question, I think I asked the question of, well, what do they give each other for Christmas and birthdays? And she says,
that'll straighten it all out.
Yeah.
and she says, oh, things like appliances and things like that. And one of our friends got up and walked right over to Heidi and says, hello, they're lesbians. And Heidi's still like, no.
And I guess I wasn't like, because I was telling Kristen, I said, it wasn't that I didn't want my mom to be a lesbian. I just said, she just never came out to me as a lesbian, so why are we giving her this title? And I don't know yet. And so they were teasing me because at the moment, I was 19, the 70s was like Charlie's Angels. I was totally going to be like a private investigator. And so they're like, you suck at this. You've lived with these women for 10 years. You don't know if your mom is gay. And I'm like, I know, but I don't, And so she goes, your mission is to go, home during Christmas break, and you need to figure this out. And I'm like, okay. So I go home, and I think that's even the funnier part of the story, because I'm kind of an adult, right? I'm 19. My brother is 21, and literally I'm like, Kyoki, do you think mom's gay? He's like, I don't know. I mean, that is the funny part of the story. How are we crazy adults, living in this situation for as long as we have? So that was kind of funny. And so it kind of was one of those things where at the, the dinner table, I'm like, so I'm running this group called and I'm like, do you guys want to share anything with me? And no one's budging. And finally, my mom and I were by ourselves, and I said, Mom, are you gay? And I was like the only one. My Kyoki's like, you're the only one who can do this, because she won't, And my mom looked at me, she's like, does it matter? I'm like, no, because it didn't. I mean, it wouldn't change anything for me. And she's like, well, then why are you asking? I'm like, I don't know. And so that's how it ended. And I went back, and they're like, you really suck at this private investigator stuff.
It's like, change your major, do it now.
And I think, when I look back at it, it was more because I didn't want to put somebody in a box or a label that wasn't ready to do that. And I think sometimes when people choose to come out, or whatever you want to call it, it has to be on their terms, not mine, and not for me to be adjusted to what that was. And so it wasn't necessarily like, I don't want her to be a lesbian. I go, I love these 2 women so much. I have no idea what this relationship is, but that's what it is. And literally a year later, I met Malcolm, and he was like, oh, I want to come home to Hawaii and visit. And so I'm like, okay, this is the deal. First of all, my mom lives with Auntie Ruby. If you have a problem with that, we're kind of done. And it was just kind of one of these conversations, but I never labeled it even then, as a 20-year-old when I met Malcolm. And it's kind of interesting, how that.
I don't know if we ever really labeled it.
I don't think my mom still is labeled at some way, shape, or form.
And that's one of the things about, as we closed out the story that's actually in the book, we talked about is that, for my generation, labeling very important, because, it demands respect. It demands acknowledgement. And so for us, it was very natural to think, well, yeah, label yourself. I have all of these labels. It's like, this book is purposefully titled Asian American Lesbian Feminist Activist, because you're going to look at me and that's what you're going to get. And for somebody else who's not, comfortable with that, that's their right. But like I said, it was very much, as you and I talked about it recently when we reconnected and talked about, turning the story into one of the stories in the book, it was, definitely also a reflection of the generational gap too. Because, for us as college students, we're blossoming and coming out and, claiming our identities, especially
and your voice,
especially at the time of the AIDS crisis, because that was going on then, and the homophobia that was going on in Orange County, because this was all happening at UCI in, late 80s. So, for us, that mindset was just very different. So to meet somebody who, was dealing with someone of a different generation, that was also eye-opening for us to kind of acknowledge this, like, okay, everybody's got to come out at their own pace, and to whatever degree that's comfortable for them.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, I think it's wonderful that we're doing it on Mother's Day. And when Kristen and I met, I was like, it is my story. It is hilarious in my mind too. However, it's about my mom, and I don't think I can I don't think I could do anything like this unless I ask her and permission.
And I encouraged it. It's like, your key players is your mom, your brother, and your cousin.
Yeah.
And it's like, get all of their permissions that, they can be presented in this story, because otherwise it won't be done.
Yeah.
I won't include it in the book.
Yeah, and my mom is pretty hilarious because she's still, and it's like, well, and I don't think she still even understands this whole thing. But I was like, this is the deal. I'm gonna, if you don't want me to do this, I will not do this. But it is a story that I think, and she's like, if this could help someone who is going through like their situation of coming out, if this could help someone, find humor in just an amazing story, then go for it. She goes, I'm 70 plus, and she's still an attorney. She still practices. She's like, if people don't want to come and be, have me, then go get somebody else. It's totally fine. So she definitely was more of a supporter in this, even though I don't think she still identifies in any way, shape, or form.
Kristen, I mean, that issue of risk, of kind of like sharing your personal part. I mean, I wonder when you felt that most, just as an activist and as a writer, when have you felt like, kind of scared about what you were sharing about yourself?
I think probably the moment that was most in my face about that is the story I shared in here was shortly at that time, I had gotten my first job in the corporate world. And if you remember, AB 101 was happening, where there was a law about protections of gay and lesbians in the workplace, and it had been vetoed, and there were protests and so on and so on. And right after the then Governor Wilson had signed that law into effect, I had joined a company down in Orange County. And I had already worked there for a couple of months, and every quarter they had, these huge employee meetings, because there were like hundreds of us, 1,000 of us, and they would rent a room in a hotel and, have, whatever was going on with the company at the time. And their thing was that all the new hires from the previous quarter should stand up and introduce themselves to the company as a whole. And they decided to be cute this time and say, yeah, and, Ad, what's the most interesting thing about you? And I stood up, and by then, all of my coworkers in my department knew that I was a lesbian because I was an activist. I come from Orange County activism, so I never hid that part. But it was the idea of suddenly being like in front of a whole bunch of people that I had no idea what their reaction would be. Plus, it was a work situation, because I do feel like there are appropriate conversations depending on the circumstances. And I was faced with, okay, everybody else is telling all these things. I mean, one woman admitted how she, found her father from being adopted, after 20 years. It's like, okay, they're telling really personal things about themselves. And I get to me, and all my coworkers in my department who already knew, they're like, waiting. And they're like, do you have the guts to do this? And I just said, well, I'm Kristen Enos. I was hired, in October, and the second most interesting thing about me is I'm a comic book fan. And then I just left it at that and sat down. And my coworkers, they laughed because they knew the joke. But I would hear people say, well, what's the most interesting thing? I don't get it. And I never explained it to them. And, nobody ever questioned me since. So.
I wonder about comics, too. I mean, there's, we were talking a little bit about this. Last year for Asian American Heritage Month, we read American Born Chinese. And we were talking about, when I first read it, I just didn't get it. I mean, it's not that I didn't get it. I understood it at like a 20% level. But in the conversation, I mean, I realized there are people there who are understanding it at like 85%. I mean, so there's different ways. We have different like literacy when it comes to comics. And so I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about the genre. Like, how did you get interested in comics? And what can they express that is different than what we might read about or see in a video?
Yeah, so if you don't know anything else about me, I also write and self-publish comic books of other genres too, and not just this. But as I mentioned, I've been reading comic books since I was 6 years old. And it was an easy art form to get into, especially when you're at that age of developing, your literary skills. And it just was so expressive to me and so colorful. And this was at an age, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have cable TV. So, so it was a natural progression to, wanting something visually entertaining and where you can like get it, at whatever level that is appropriate for you. And it was something that, just lightened my imagination a lot more, I think, than anything else than a regular book could. Not to say that I didn't read actual, prose books, but, comic books just had like a different, ping in the brains, so to speak. And so it's an art form I've loved, since then, and I've been a fan. And then only recently, because I've focused on my writing skills, I realized I could collaborate with artists who, love to draw, and they were like, give me something to draw. And so I started collaborating with these people and started producing comic books. And that's when finally I realized, Active Voice, is ripe for being able to turn some of those stories into comic form. And so I had, a set team of artists that I'd already worked with in other stories, and I thought, their style could work for something that's, more modern day and anecdotal. And so if you ever look through the book, you'll see some different styles, but it all, tells their story effectively. And that's what I like about the comic medium is that, when depending on the artist's style, can also influence how much you see in the work, and then, the pacing of the work or how much detail and expression that you probably wouldn't even think of, reflecting in a prose story, comes through in a comic format. That you can get
I like the way
otherwise.
you can show people's expressions on their faces. Do you have a favorite frame in the book? Because I do.
I love the entire book.
Yeah, that's
I
good.
love my team of artists.
How about you, Heidi? Is there something that, a favorite image that you have?
I like the cover. I like Dan Parent.
Yeah.
I feel like I grew up with Archie comic books, and
Yeah.
so to have
Yeah, it
him
does.
present in the front, I think it's really cool. I also
Yeah.
like the way that Cassandra made me look, because I look really cute as a comic book
But that
person.
was, it's just the way you really look. So were you more pleased with some of the artists, or did you choose them with regard to certain stories, or how did that come across, just like the different styles that are in here? Because there's like four artists really that you're collaborating with in this one project.
Yeah, well, so to let you know, I write another series called Web of Lives, which is a drama cyberpunk series focused on women and queer characters. So I made a solicitation for artists for that series. And so people would, submit work, to let me evaluate whether or not I wanted to collaborate with them. And I don't know if Cassandra knows the story, but Cassandra was one of the first people who, said that she would like to participate in this project. And I kind of looked at her work and I thought, I could see that she had the flexibility of doing different styles. Because, when you've seen enough artists over time, you can tell what they're capable of.
Yeah.
And that's what I started to say, I think I could work with her to turn some of the Active Voice stories, which had always been bubbling in the back of my mind, turn those into comic strips. So I experimented with her. I said, hey, I'm willing to launch a new project with you. Let's, test this out. So the very first story in the book, called Birth of an Activist, which was my coming out experience in dealing with harassers, she and I tested it out, and I worked out, and I thought, this works. I think, if I find the right artists who have the right style to turn these stories into something that's, accessible in a comic format, I think this works. So she was actually the first one, and then with that in mind, now that I had this as a project, I realized I started to evaluate other artists for not only my other works, but for this as well, and that's how the other artists started to come into being. My three other artists, Cassandra's from New York, Lisa Marie Kroll, she's actually from Scotland. I've never met any of these people. Derek Chua, who's he's going to kill me if I can't remember which country it is. I think it's the
Southeast
Philippines. Yeah, Singapore, I want to say. Again, I've never met him. And then Beth Varney, who's in, I think, Atlanta. So, all of these people, thanks to the internet, I was able to connect with them, and we were able to produce this
do you
work.
send them, like, how detailed are the instructions you send them? Like,
I give them a script, so I give them, like, here's the page, here are the main points, like panels. Like, in this
Yeah.
panel, this should be happening, here's the dialogue, so on and so forth. So I do all the lettering, all the dialogue. So, they just have to draw, the background. So I kind of tell them, this is kind of what's happening. I give them an idea, and then they can read the script. And what happens is they do pencils. They kind of lay it out and say, here's what I'm interpreting as the actual layout of the story. And then I look at that, and I give them feedback based on what I know, has to happen. Or, I'll give them some guidance. Oh, that expression looks a little harsh. Or, oh, I forgot you need to add this element. So they'll take that back, and then they'll give me the inks based on my feedback. And then, we clean it up, and then I do the lettering on top of that, and then we send it out to our, our proofers. Like Heidi's story, we went through like 2 or 3 rounds of, just getting feedback from everybody to make sure that we caught things. And we made some big changes. We actually made some significantly big changes because of that feedback.
Yeah.
But made sure at the end result, everybody was happy with it. So.
You're in one of the frames in here. You mentioned always having your camera with you.
Yes.
Before we had cell phone cameras, where everybody always has their camera with you. But Heidi was a little bit like that when she was 20 years old too. But I wonder if your work as a photographer has had an effect on just how you do these projects. Or
Yeah, so because I was involved with the news magazine, the Orange County Blade, which is the gay and lesbian news magazine that was launched in Orange County in 1992, not only did my column start there, but I was also contributing journalist and photographer for them. So my lifelong love of just taking pictures, back having the Kodak and having, all of those iterations when it was expensive to take pictures and get them developed. So I always kind of looked at things from a photographer's eye as well as, being a writer. So it also helped with this book that there was a lot of reference material too. I mean, I would go through my old pictures and kind of, pull out things that it's like, oh, I forgot about that. Like,
you see, I really look so real in here. It just, you really feel it. The Aldrich Circle and that whole thing.
Well, and little things like I had to, figure out. It's like, well, what kind of phone would somebody be using in 1992? So I had to, look that up. So, not only the technology check, but a little bit of the fashion, a little bit of the hairstyle. I mean, Lisa Marie loves drawing, mohawks. I don't know why. But I could have told her after a while, it's like, okay, not many people in Orange County had mohawks. But I'll let it go for now.
It wasn't the most popular hairstyle.
So it was a combination of, being aware just visually as a photographer, and like I said, being also a writer, that the comic mediums was kind of a good marriage of that kind of expression.
Yeah. As you began, do you remember what your first column was about? And what were easy columns and what were hard columns for you when you first got going?
Okay, so to explain how my column came to be, it probably is a better thing to start with.
Yeah.
So the Blade launched in 1992, early 92, and the idea behind it was that Orange County didn't have a gay and lesbian magazine. And so, it very much a do-it-yourself, these three men that I knew from the community work had gotten together and, just said, let's do it. So Orange County, ironically, if you did not know, the gay and lesbian community back then was very cooperative. I mean, the Gay Republicans Club, Log Cabin Club, and the Eleanor Roosevelt Democratic Club, we partnered together on events. I mean, we talked to each other. We got things done together. So the idea of, community and cooperation, despite, your individual, niches, the Orange County community was very much about that. So the magazine grew out of that, aura of, just togetherness. And when they launched, they contacted, various organizations that would want to, have people to contribute. And one of the groups was the Gay and Lesbian Student Union at UCI, which I was a part of at the time. And since I had always been involved in the school magazines in high school, the newspapers and all that, so for me it was just like a natural calling for me to get involved. So I immediately started participating as, like I said, a journalist and photographer. And what had happened is that the publishers of the magazine very much wanted to label a gay and lesbian magazine. So back then it was, the gay and lesbian tangent. And after a while, it was like the content was predominantly male.
Right.
And so me, being a mouthy person, kind of pointed out to them. And plus I was hearing, from the women's side of the house, it's like, they come to me because they knew I was into the magazine, to kind of make a point. It's like, we need to have more women's voices in this magazine, more women's content. Otherwise, you're not living up to your masthead, promo about being a gay and lesbian magazine. Yeah. So I pointed this out to the then editor, David Etheridge, and the publisher, Bill LaPointe at the time. And David kind of flipped the script on me. He says, okay, well, if you want more women's voices, you write something. So that's when I thought, all right. and my diva-ness is like, okay, I'll do this. But when I sat down and really thought about it, it's like, well, what do I want to write about? Because even though I kind of complained to them about the lack of women's material, personally, I didn't really want to write women's material. I didn't want to go to a music event and write reviews. Exactly. I didn't want to write, gossipy stuff. And that just didn't click with me. And that's when the idea of activism and the idea of, speaking my stories, and not just my stories as, a lesbian, but the stories of my friends, sharing our experiences. That's how my column Active Voice came to be. And that's where the focus of it came about, was, about being out, about what you present yourself publicly. So my first column was about public displays of affection. Oh, yeah. About why people, have, issues of like, just the idea of holding somebody's hand as you walk down the street, or, the risks that people take about, going to a gay pride event or
Right.
something like that. So that's how the column kind of evolved, and I kind of, hit and miss. Some of it was experimental. I mean, to David, the editor's credit, he just kind of gave me free rein. As long as I turned in something, by deadline, it was in there. And that's just how it just evolved over time. And then, like I said, that's been the core of what Active Voice has been around, for me as a column, as well as evolving into the graphic novel that we have.
I have a strong sense, like I really remember sermons that didn't work that I wrote. Do you have that too? I mean,
I learned opinion pieces are not my strong point.
Yeah.
It's like the irony of me being an activist, and I tell people that, is I'm actually a very private person. I have very strong lines of what I will talk about versus what I will not talk about. And I learned that, opinion pieces is just not my forte, or, trying to convince people to do something like, promoting an event or a cause is just my thing. I realized what works best for me in this format was really just telling a story, and it be a positive example. And whether you got, the story just at the, first bare minimum level, great. But if you kind of got a little bit deeper and kind of got, what the irony is about what I'm telling, or, the greater impact, that's even better. But no expectations, it's like take it or leave it.
Yeah. For both of you, I mean this for Heidi also. I mean, how receptive was UC Irvine to these movements when you were there, and how do you think things are changing there as you go? Like, what are some of your recollections of being a college student in Orange County, and how the university either supported or failed to support gay and lesbian students?
Well, I think from the gay and lesbian perspective, when I came on campus, as Heidi said, we had a trailer. I mean, the Gay and Lesbian Student Union office was a trailer in the back of the humanities trailer.
I remember
complex.
the religious organizations had a little trailer too. Yeah. Everybody had a trailer.
It's like we had space, but it was a trailer. And I actually talked about how the evolution of the campus over my time of being there is that eventually they built a really wonderful student complex where a lot of the people who had trailers, we now moved out and got into this got office space in this complex. But specifically about UCI, what was interesting, if any of you remember, the first Orange County Pride Festival that happened in 1992, that happened in Santa Ana, Centennial Park, and it was incredibly controversial, caused a lot of ruckus, and that story's in this book as well. And because it was so controversial and involving police action and people protesting, so on and so forth, UCI opened its doors and said, hey, you're welcome to move the Pride Festival over to our campus. And so, fate or what have you, I was actually one of the co-chairs of the student union when that festival first moved to the campus. Mm-hmm. So, for me, it was just wonderful timing to see, not only my particular university be very embracing and, supportive, but, everything started to snowball because also the first year that the Pride Festival came to UCI was also the first year that the Orange County had its presentation of the Names Memorial quote be displayed. So, like I said, it was just a lot of cosmic timing of events that were happening at that time, and a lot of pride that it was at UCI. Yeah.
How about for you, Heidi? I mean, just the Asian American, were like the Asian American Student Union. I mean, what was going on politically for you at UC Irvine during the time that you were there?
Oh, mine is probably different than, so I have two different questions, or two different answers. One is I was an RA for the international dorm, so Persian Gulf War. I had a kid from Tel Aviv, so I had a lot of other political kind of things that were going on. And then I was preparing to go abroad to the University of Nairobi. So there was a lot there. But with Kristen, and with regards to what was going on with the gay lesbian movement, and we tease that, is it my naivete, or is it just that I didn't care? Like, even with regards to gay lesbian, I mean, just, so one of the things that we laugh about is that I was a campus tour guide, and so I would take and I would take people to go see the entire campus, and this is the Gay Lesbian Student Union, and introduce Nico and Kristen, and they just crack up at that I would, and I was like, why? People should know that we have this on, this is part of the tour.
Well, to add to that, we were advertising a gay and lesbian dance. So my best friend Nico and I were going around campus replacing banners and posters that had been ripped down. So we had this huge banner that said, gay and lesbian dance, and she's got this group of parents and students coming out. So as we're unfurling this banner, she's like, oh, and here we are. We have, a lot of diversity.
Everybody should go to the dance.
And I didn't think the parents were so cool about that.
Yeah.
So,
The parents in the comic were a little bit more less cool than the probably actual parents were. So one of the things that happens when you write something like that is you start to hear from people who've read it, and I wonder just Heidi, what your family said about it. I wonder, Kristen, what people in your life have what they said changed your perspective on what it is that you collaborated on.
well, just in general for the book, I recently spoke at WonderCon, and one of the guys in the audience actually went to Cal State Fullerton. And he says, as he listened to me speak, he realized, wait, she's naming all these events that I lived through.
Yeah.
And he realized that my book was basically his queer youth as well. So it's like you just never know, when you're going to resonate with somebody, because he was real thrilled, just like I was talking about things that he remembered. And he's like, oh, I forgot about this, or I didn't know about, this side of, this event that I had gone to. So, you throw your net out there, and you just never know, what you're going to catch.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I think for me, my cousin picks out the little things. So my cousin is in the book. She's the person, because Kyoki and I, my brother and I, could not figure out if my mom was gay. We called her. And
she's an expert.
And yeah, she's an expert, let alone, she was a few years older, so we thought she would know better. And just so happened, like 6 years later, she came out. So that was even funnier because, so anyway, so she caught a few things like, your mom's wearing a flower in her ear. My mom is so not.
Would not wear.
Yeah, yeah. And that kind of little things like that, which was silly. But no, I think that the book does a really good job of providing humor, providing a sense of how to be, like, I think Kristen calls me the queer ally, how to do that. And I think I love that. I'm going to own that term. I just think it's great. And I think when my kids read it or heard about it, Amelia was more just like, wow, Mom, like you're like a hipster. Like, and I was like, this is big cred. I'm telling you, I was like, Kristen, this is like huge, because when your teenagers think you're a hipster, it's pretty awesome. And so I said, you're in the LGBTQ community like back in the day. And so I was looking at her friendly, I was like, Amelia, it's always been an LGBT community. It's just people are not open to accepting that. But it's always been for me as far as my life. So.
But in a way, she really has her finger on something. And that is that, part of what makes it so powerful is that things have really changed. That
is
there's
the hope.
some of it, that is the hope. But it is. You can get married in the state of Alabama as a same-sex couple. This is an amazing change for me. But and even that's just one thing. One of the things so interesting is that it's almost like you have to constantly explain like the technology. You couldn't just go on the World Wide Web or the internet to. So it does capture that too. But I wonder just about how the technology has changed and how that has affected just what life is like for a student going to UC Irvine, coming out, and how is that different in the year 2017 than it was in 1987?
Well, I was laughing because when I was struggling to get connected, just to find something, I was a student at UC Irvine, I was living in the dorms, and like I said, I didn't know anybody, queer. It's like, how do you start? It's like there was no internet, there's no social media, nothing. And so I did what probably nobody would ever think to do. I picked up the student phone book. I was like, the idea of a student phone book.
Yeah, right.
And I just went down and thought, okay, are there any organizations? And I found the Gay and Lesbian Student Union entry. And the problem was that their office was never opened. But at least I found that this organization existed. Whereas now, on the internet, you Google it. It's so incredibly easy, but easy to find information. I'm not going to say any more easy to take the strength to step forward and make that connection.
Yeah, you're right, because there's a difference between having like an internet connection with something and actually having a relationship with a person.
Mm-hmm. Well, not only that, but just somebody to send an email to say, hey, I would like some help, or to send a Facebook message or something. That still requires a certain amount of strength and conviction. That do you want to take that step to open yourself up to being identified as that.
But in a way, that's part of the problem with this, is like there was no contact person. Like there was no one that you could actually talk to. I mean,
That I knew of.
yeah.
I mean, like
Well,
I
but
said, as
still,
far
I mean,
as
I think if you went now, you'd be able to talk to your RA or talk to the president of the
Well-
GS, you know, the whatever the successor organization to GLSU. You know.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a resource center on campus now that did not exist when I was there back then. And again, like I said, even if I just even knew somebody, just to know another student would have been, mind-blowing for me, but I didn't. So, coming from a completely isolated background to, now, today, I mean, it's like, well, okay, I probably would not be the same person because I would not have, had to be as, curious and,
Persistent. And
yeah.
just, like you said, just keep going back to the same trailer still closed, still closed.
Yeah.
Still closed. Yeah,
So,
that's
like I said, I'm not negating saying people necessarily have it easier to be, queer. It's finding the information's easier, but to actually be queer, I'm sure is just as challenging.
Yeah, and making those connections. You mentioned earlier the comic conventions and being part of the panels for that. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just like the culture of comics, I mean, like say relative to the culture of video games or other kind of subcultures, in just their connection to GLBTQ life.
Well, there's definitely an overlap. I mean, geekdom, you're always willing and open to, things that are different, things that are challenging. And I mean, if any of you out there, you're exposed to something geek, I'm sure in your life, whether it's Game of Thrones or whether it's a vampire movie or something like that. So for comic books, a lot of people who read comic books definitely, do things like games and all of that. And it's a way of expressing yourself, and as also as a reader to enjoy things that you don't find available anywhere else. I mean, people talk about well, it's just bloody stuff, violence, and so on and so forth. Well, Shakespeare was bloody and violent, and you think about it, it's not contemporary. I mean, people, they kind of blur themselves and realizing, okay, well, no, you don't fight with swords. You don't solve your problems by fighting each other with swords, or you shouldn't anyway, in the corporate world. So it's really not that hard of a step to, look into the fantasy, look into the science fiction, and comic books is just, like more visually accessible to that, along with, animation and so on and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. We have a tradition at the forum, and that is we have note cards, so people can ask questions via note cards, and Rebecca Nessel will collect those. So Rebecca's right in the back there, and she'll take your questions. I was thinking so much about Mother's Day today, Heidi, and just what it's like for your kids to grow up relative to, or our kids to grow up, relative to what it was like as the, versus you. I mean, like kind of conversations that you had when your mom growing up are probably different than how you prepare them for the life on the sexual continuum.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
What's
having
your philosophy about kind of
yeah,
child
I think just
rearing?
having it be in their lives, like two grandmothers on one side, or just having them grow up feeling like that's normal, or that's just what it is, and not think anything differently of it has been great. I think it's so great, growing up here in San Francisco, and I think because it's such an open space, they go to a great school that does open to diversity and every kind of diversity. So it's a really great time. Yes, it's scary in a sense to raise kids in the technology world of social media, wanting to Uber around or get around in a different way along the city. But there is a side of it that is just so great of the acceptance. And yeah, I do think that we get to change the narrative, in raising our kids and what maybe they grew up with. I think I have this funny story. It doesn't have to do necessarily with this topic, but. About when Micah, I think, was 4 years old, I had to go to Cal to speak at the law school about water law. And there's a lot of interesting work that's going on in Hawaii with water law, and a lot of Ninth Circuit follows what Hawaii has done. And so I went to go speak in a water law classroom. And when I came out, Malcolm and Micah were waiting for me, and my law professor was there. And I said, "Oh, Micah, this is my law professor." And he just kind of looked at him and looked at him. Then he kind of like, "Mommy, can boys be lawyers too? Like, and I thought to myself, I like this because he's only known like my mom and my auntie and my these women who have been lawyers. So I just thought, yes, this is great. You know, sometimes some men can.
Bullying is just such an issue for young people, and I wonder just what your own personal experience has been with bullying, and then how do we address bullying for our children now?
Well, bullying is interesting, and that's actually a story that I'll be dealing with in the next collection. But I would just say in general, as a society, I'm very grateful that, for most of our society, that we're learning our lessons about the ramifications of bullying, and people realizing that, that doesn't have to be part of growing up. That doesn't make sense to condone this behavior. And, on a political level, and the only way I'll get to this is that I'm glad the timing of this book is coming out for people to realize, you don't have to stand up for poor treatment. You don't have to watch somebody else be harassed. So I think if anything, my stories is very much, and I tell people, it's a book about standing up for yourself and for others. It's like when you see something wrong, either, for yourself, it's not like, trying to be the diva of the moment. It's like, getting equal treatment. It's like getting equal treatment and respect and acknowledgement is very much a core lesson that I think our children, need to have instilled in them. That it's all right to say, no, I'm not going to put up with that kind of behavior, or no, I'm not going to have you treat my friend that way. And it's like, if we keep perpetuating that, that's, I think where our society needs to go.
And I think bullying is probably the reason why my mom was so closeted, to be honest. I think she, later on in life, when we got to talk about, more openly, I think that was her fear, is that I wouldn't have friends, or people would be mean to me because of it. And I thought, gosh, Mom, then they wouldn't be my friends. I wouldn't choose friends who wouldn't accept who you are, and which was kind of funny because when I went to a boarding school, and all my friends would come to Maui because it's an awesome place to come, and they would come for a week and stay with my mom and Aunt Ruby and all of us, and so when I was in college and I realized my mom might be gay, and so I called all my friends saying, "Do you think my mom's gay?" And he goes, "Oh no," and I it was just so great, the fact that, and they're like, I'm like, "Oh, my mom's gay," and then they're like, "Yeah, we figured," and I said, "Well, why didn't you guys tell me?" And they're like, "Oh no, it's just Auntie Danny." They literally was like, no one cared in my life, at least.
Yeah, it's funny. I think when we were growing up, there was just the sense that you'll always have bullying, and kids will always be kids, boys will be boys, whatever that is. And you're right. The fact that adults are talking about it at least does help us move forward. We've got some really great questions. Kristen, how have you seen comics evolve in terms of their relationship with the LGBTQ plus community since you were younger?
Well, definitely the material has been more inclusive, obviously. We've got a lot of creators now, especially in the world of self-publishing, that there are people who, realize they don't have to beg, a publisher to approve their work. They can do it themselves and put it out on the internet and tell their stories. Or, as I said, for my case, collaborate with other artists. And I told them very point blank, I said, whatever I write, I purposely do not, ask the approval of any publisher. So it's purely my vision, and it's not going to be somebody who's going to be concerned about censorship or be concerned about, alienating any particular group, because, hey, there's those groups, need to have entertainment as well. It's
so interesting because you're right. In some ways, you're offering a technological answer to this problem, and that is there are more ways of just getting your message out there. How does do you have a website? You do have a website. I know that, but
KristenEnos.com.
Yeah. So how does that? Is that when you're writing for the website? Does that feel like a very different thing than when you're writing for the Blade or when you're writing comics?
Well, now that I've retired from writing for other sources and other people, I'm very particular about what I want to focus on. So I don't do journalism work anymore, but I take my experiences from that and kind of like I said, maintain the active voice concept as a column, either through columns or through comic stories, and then I do my fiction work as well. So for me, I have a website, and it's purely just my projects. It's not, what Kristen ate today, and I don't even put that on Facebook. She can tell you. So, so it's really just to promote, whatever my material is, and I put sample artwork of things that are, coming up. Because, like, for example, I'm always working on a new project. I'm even starting, a second volume of this book, so gathering material for that. So my website is all about, hey, here's what I've got coming up as a project, and here's some sample stories, and some speaking events that I'm going to.
So you might meet someone today who'll be in your next book.
You never know. You never know.
Heidi, what is your biggest challenge as an ally of the LGBTQ community? Actually, the question is, what is your biggest? So I figured you're both allies, but
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
no, it's okay. So I'm trying to think of like how to answer that for myself too. I don't know if I don't foresee see being an ally as a challenge, I guess. I feel like, right now I want to be a support, and I've always wanted to be a support. So I have a student who is a law student who is African-American woman who just came out, and she came out over Facebook, and has completely cut off a very, very, like her spiritual side, her church side of her family, and that was a really hard thing. And so it was nice that I was her person that she came to talk to with regards to, coming out. And I guess what I would want to say to people is, if someone does come out, it took a lot for that person back and forth thinking. It could have taken years for them to come out. So when they do come out, it is our job as an ally or a person who loves them to just accept. I feel like a lot of people kind of attacked her and said, like, "Are you sure? Are you?" Like, oh my gosh! I mean, it took her so long to do this. So, I guess as a queer ally, I don't think of it as like the challenge. I just think of being more of a support in this world. And it means something different. I mean, we're part of a church that ordains and marries gay people.
I definitely was like, "Come on over, babe."
We live in a city that loves and cherishes, gay culture.
Right.
So it's a little bit different than it was like in 1992. And I remember, a friend of mine asking, does your church, if you had to choose between your church and what do you make of your church? When it doesn't do everything you agree with? And it was hard to explain to him that we were like right on the cusp of ordaining gay people, that we had been ordaining gay people, but we were on the cusp of ordaining openly gay people. It was hard to explain to him that I just saw us, being very close to that point.
Well, I think you helped me too with that, because it was something that was religion as well, and so it was a reading from the Bible that someone was pulling from, kind of using it against her as a sword. And I said, well, let's look at that same thing. And in that same verse of the Bible, it says also if you eat shellfish or something. Right. I was like, so come on, and so we gave her a little bit of some tools to go back.
So you sent her one of my articles?
Yes, I
did. All right, moving right along. Can you speak a little bit about the intersection of Asian American Christianity and the LGBTQ community? What has been your experience? That's a good one.
Well, unfortunately, I guess this is where I come out, is that I am not Christian. I actually had a very strong Baptist period from age 8 to 14, so I do have a Christian background.
Right.
And it actually influenced a lot of why I didn't come out, because, I was going through the proper behavior of things. And obviously, when you're back in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, you're not even thinking queer. You're just thinking trying to, live good Christian values. And I'm not regretting any of it. I mean, it still instilled things to me that I adhere to today, because I don't drink alcohol. I mean, that was the start of it. But it really kind of made me look at things from, kind of a pureness of ethics perspective. And that's probably what I've always carried with me was the idea of, being moral isn't necessarily, what's being dictated to you. It's what's, treating people with respect and treating people with acceptance and support. Like, the act of coming out is really an act of trust. It's not a case necessarily or usually somebody's going to come out to you because, they're just like, just blah, here I am, take me or leave me, even though some people will say that. I'd say more often than not, there's a person here is like, I still want you to be in my life. Will you still be in my life? You know, that's usually what the act of coming out is about. And, you know, that person, you know, after struggling for many years has reached a point saying, you know, for everything about me that you know, this is one more thing, and, you know, whether it's a religious, you know, angle you're coming at it from, or, you know, the church group or something like that, that's got to be something, like I said at the beginning of this talk, it's like, you know, it challenges your definition of love and acceptance, you know, when you're in that kind of environment.
Well, that's what I mean. I felt so much. I mean, you know, to use more overtly Christian language. I mean, I really do feel like this is a ministry that you do. It's just like, you know, your activism is a sense of calling that you have to you know, create a greater fairness in the world and to help people love and accept each other more. And so, in some ways, it just seems like such a natural outgrowth of almost like a prophetic vocation, a calling to do this. So, we're really grateful for this, because it did take courage, and you know, you know, I can imagine it would be scary to be, you know, away from home and you know, basically knocking on the van door until someone finally let you in, you know, and putting yourself in places that are very surprising and different. Okay, so here's a question. As a bisexual teen growing up in San Francisco, I've been blessed in a lot of ways with a more accepting and receptive community. Undoubtedly, there are still many pockets of the country that are fervently anti-gay. What steps do you feel the LGBTQ plus community should take to reach and educate these people in these areas? That's a great question.
I think my personal lesson is it really needs to start from within. I mean, you cannot have somebody from outside a community go into that community and make as much of an impact as is somebody from within that community saying, hey, I'm queer. Because a lot of my stories are people who just assumed that I was not, and saying something incredibly like phobic, and for me to not sit there and take it. And you know, I was in a corporate meeting once, and this person made a very inappropriate, you know, speech, Republican Toastmaster speech, that should not be in a technology meeting, you know, team meeting. And you know, even though the language wasn't necessarily overtly phobic, but it was not a far cry from it. And I sat there, and at the end of the meeting, I just introduced myself as a lesbian who was a voting Democrat. And so that changed things, you know, turned everything on its head, that people need to realize, oh, wait, I was not talking to who I thought I was talking to. So people from these communities who are ostracized, you know, they need to you know, have the strength and you know, support to be able to come out themselves, because that makes such a much stronger statement to be somebody from within a group to, you know, claim an identity that you weren't expecting before, and still say, hey, I still want to be part of this group. You know, like I said, coming out is an act of trust. I still want to be here, and then, you know, it has to proceed from there.
Yeah. So here's a question. In this time of the man sitting in the White House, what are your concerns for young, innocent queer people? That's good.
Ironically, I had no thoughts that our country would be in the state that it would be in, because this book was published in December, and I had spent all of last year working on it, so I never ever occurred to me that a book about activism would be as important as it is now, especially queer activism. And I think, you know, the same message is like, you know, do not, you know, as a person who is queer, and if you're young and you're in that position of less power, it's like, don't listen to somebody putting you down or labeling you in a way or giving you a definition you don't agree with. Because it's one of those, it's like, you know, if somebody calls me something, and whether, you know, the language may be the same, but the tone and the other words they, you know, put around that, it's like, no, that's not me. You know, and to be able to say, you know, like I said, talking about speaking up when you're in an ostracized community, it's like saying, you know, no, you know, queer people are not like that. It's like, I'm one. And to reach out and connect with other people, realize, you know, you can have support, but yeah, it takes a lot of strength to, you know, be firm in your own convictions of your identity. I mean, I'm not doubting that people experiment. I mean, I went through a straight period, yeah. But at the same time, it's like I ended up still over here. So, you know, to have somebody else I me or, you know, tell me that I'm not something or put me down is something I won't put up with. And I hope the youth of today, you know, keep that as a lesson for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about bullying at kind of like at the local elementary and middle school level, but there is a kind of bullying that's just part of our national discourse now. It's like we all need to be standing up and saying no to those messages that dehumanize people, that treat them as if they're not loved by God. And you're so right about that being so much of a part of our work. So here, I'm going to try to read this. The question is, can you talk about the current efforts for the hotel and nightclub as the oldest place in the U.S. Ledger of Historic Places and Buildings? So this is the Boom Boom Room in Laguna Beach in historic preservation.
I've been to the Boom Boom Room, but that was many, many years ago. I didn't know if the Boom Boom Room was still around.
We'll have to Google it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, are they saying that it's been made a historic place?
I think that's what they're asking about, is whether it should be.
Well, it's a landmark. I mean, anybody who knows the queer community in Laguna Beach, I'm sure, is very familiar with it. I personally don't have an opinion one way or the other. My thoughts is if somebody wants to make something a landmark and it's got special meanings, and by the way, it happens to be queer important, all power to them. It's like, do it.
Right. And another good thing to write about for the future. So I'm so grateful for you both for being here. My last question is just, what signs of hope do you see for things as we look forward to the future? I mean, you're both such optimistic and positive people. I don't know if you have anything more to add.
I will say, it just happened this morning. When my times of trying to get myself mentally awake for this panel, I was actually on YouTube, and I was watching a video, Wanda Sykes, if you know of her. She's a wonderful African-American comedian, openly married to a French woman, has, a twin boy and girl. And she was on one of the talk shows, and the host had mentioned that she had twins and said they were girls. I'm sure it was just a slip. And she corrected him and said it was a boy and a girl. And I thought it was fascinating that all of the comments, like 90% of the comments, were all people like blasting the host, saying, "No, she has a boy and girl." It's like, get your facts together.
Right.
So I thought that was like, we're at a time that people, random comments, people are like, this is a lesbian woman with her family. Acknowledge what kind of family she has. And for me, that's just like such a small thing, but it was such a positive moment to kind of see that.
Yeah. What about you, Heidi Ho?
I think I'm just hopeful for this next generation. I mean, just having. I just did an event yesterday where families came to the high school and their new families, and I love the fact that there's like two moms or two dads. There's just like, it's wonderful that at a parent meeting that's just normal for me now and for my kids, and I think that gives me hope. I think if you are queer or experimenting or figuring it out, make sure you find your people that can be your support, but also look out for your queer allies, in the heterosexual community, because we are here and we love you.
Yeah, well, that's great. It's funny too. There's not that many people that I know of in your generation who grew up in a household like yours, and you're right. It's a blessing to see.
It's a gift.
It's a gift. It's a gift. Well, the two of you are both great gifts to me. I'm so glad that you could both be here, and I just enjoyed our conversation so much. And I know that I'll never look at these comic books in quite the same way again.
Oh, you should.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot more than meets the eye in them. So I'd like to invite you all next time that we have the forum next week. We'll be talking to the Holocaust survivor Ben Stern. We're not going to be able to hear from Holocaust survivors for the next 30 years, so it's a very important forum. His daughter Charlene has done a documentary called Near Normal Man. It's a short enough documentary so we can screen the documentary first and then have the conversation. Today at 11 o'clock, the liturgy will be upstairs in Grace Cathedral. We're a house of prayer for all peoples, so join us if you can. And we do rely on your support, so if you're able to make a gift to the forum, we would appreciate it. And finally, thanks. Join me in thanking Kristen Enos and Heidi Ho for being our guests today.
Thank you.